Welcome back, 1570 AM WNST. My next guest is our very own Luke Jones. Luke, welcome in.
Dennis, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Luke, and hopefully you're doing the same. I was at the stadium, M&T Bank last Sunday, watching the Ravens play the Bills, and I got to tell you, when I got home, I watched the game again on tape, and it's they're similar experiences, Luke, but they're also different. You pick up different things when you're there live in person. You also pick up different things when you watch the game, particularly when the all 22 tape comes out. You see different angles, different things, and I've got to tell you, at the stadium, I was okay with John Harbaugh going for it on that fourth and long two. But after, in retrospect, I didn't like the decision. So, love to hear your comments on the game and what you thought.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point, I mean, they have such a big game coming up Sunday night against the Bengals. A huge game. I think it's a game that's, frankly, at this point, when you're talking about two of the biggest blown leads in franchise history and losing a game, I mean, this is something they had only done 3 times in their history, blowing a 17-point or more lead and losing. They've done it twice in 3 weeks. This is an under the hood kind of game for me at this point. I don't want to hear about their record with black jerseys and record in prime time and, oh, it's the Bengals. Well, the Bengals accomplished more last postseason than the Ravens have in close to a decade now. Let's just call it what it is. So, but to get back to your question.
And we'll certainly address the Bengals, not to cut you off, but
right.
How can this team be 3-point favorites against the Bengals, a team that scored 82 points on them twice last year, 41 points in each game? I don't understand, and maybe I know the Vegas people that get paid to do this for a living, and I don't, but I don't see how they could be favored in this game.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. And I do, my kind of big point on the Bengals, I'll save for a few moments from now. But just to put the fourth down to bed, to put the Bills game to bed, at least in terms of you and I talking about it, I struggle with this, Dennis. I don't have a strong opinion on it from the standpoint of the analytics did say it was a slight go. Devin Duvernay was wide open. Mike Davis is wide open.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson didn't make the play. I mean, Lamar has played at an incredibly high level, and I'm not, this is not a referendum to dismiss all of his greatness, but at the same time, John Harbaugh made a decision to put the game in the hands of his absolute best player, and he didn't make the play. That's just the truth. Now, where I do struggle a little bit, and you said you went back and forth on it, and I've gone back and forth on this. At some point in time, you look at these decisions, and it's like, look, we can talk about what the analytics say. We can talk about what the defense is. At some point, you need to start converting these. And this goes back to last year, even before Lamar got hurt. I mean, go back to the Pittsburgh game where I agreed with that decision because they had lost Marlon Humphrey and they were down. I think they were out of corners at that point. I think they had 2 healthy corners at the end of the game. But the point is, you can't keep calling for this if you're going to continue to be lousy in short yardage. And I guess for me, I'm more concerned that they didn't get in the end zone on 2nd and 3rd down, much more so than 4th. But
I was sitting, to your point, I was sitting down by the end zone where the plays were happening. And J.K. Dobbins, I mean, he went up the middle from the 2-yard line. There was a big hole to his left. It was a step and a half to his left. But, whether it was that, whether it was Mark Andrews being missed by Lamar in the end zone, whether it was Justice Hills pulling up a hamstring when he was the most explosive back on the roster. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's one play here, one play there. But at the end of the day, you just, in their totality, it ended up in a loss, And that's the bottom line. It just, that's why it's a total team game, whether it's coaching, special teams, whatever.
No question about it. And I think what's concerning for me is it feels like in these biggest games, look, if you want to, and I wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com, if you want to puff out your chest about beating the Jets or beating the post-Tom Brady era New England Patriots, go right ahead. But it's feeling more and more concerning for me that when they're going up against these other heavyweights, and maybe, I don't know if Miami's a heavyweight, but give them credit. I mean, they beat the Bills too, right? And the Bills have been perceived as the best team in the NFL going into the season. But it just feels like they're coming up small when they need to come up big late in games. And as to your point, that's across the board. I think for me, and just to put the fourth down to bed, I think I was in favor of it overall, just from the standpoint of I watched that final drive, and watching that final drive, is 3 points winning that game? I don't think so. And people will say, okay, well, maybe you could have held the Bills to a field goal. I'll remind everyone over and over and over again, extending the game, taking it into overtime does not equate winning the game. So I'm still okay with the decision. However, again, it comes back to got to execute. And that's where I totally agree with your point that look at coaching. Even though it didn't bite them, they took a delay a game in the first half that made a 46-yard field goal, a 51-yard field goal. Go back to the Miami game. I get it. Marlon Humphrey and Marcus Peters weren't 100%, but you had guys out there who didn't know what they were doing, and you're letting receivers run 30 yards downfield with no one around them. That's coaching. Those are coaching mistakes there. I mean, you got to have guys in position. Guys need to execute. I mean, it's across the board. So as much as I understand we focus on the fourth down decision, and I'm not sitting here banging the table saying, oh, it 100%. I felt great about it. I'm just saying that if you're asking me one way or the other, I still look at that final drive and say, what about that final drive leads you to think 3 points was going to be enough to win the game there? So that's where I do understand it. But again, in a vacuum, it's great to say that, but if you continue to fail in those short yardage situations, and they've had their issues with short yardage, is one of the reasons they couldn't hold on to the lead against Miami, even though I put much more of that on the defense in the end. So it just hasn't been good enough across the board. It's been really good for stretches. I mean, my goodness, they've trailed by only a few seconds in these two losses. I've seen some people say only a few seconds all year. Keep in mind, they trailed in that New England game at a couple different points, but they've trailed for only seconds in their two losses. But guess what? It's a 60-minute ball game. And that's where I keep coming back to, what does this team have under the hood? Where is the, I don't, for lack of a better term, I don't want to say toughness, because, I'm not questioning anyone's manhood or anything like that. But, where's the mental tenacity to keep going when, the opponent does punch you in the mouth a little bit? And, we've talked about this going back all the way to the 2019 playoff loss against Tennessee. I mean, the Ravens were almost invincible by the end of that season, right? And they were completely shocked and stunned and upset in that playoff game. And, to some degree, I feel like they haven't truly 100% recovered from that ever since. And that's not to say, I mean, my goodness, they made the playoffs and won a playoff game the following year, but just feels like when they go up against these other teams that are perceived to be as good as them, and Cincinnati's a great example of this. You just mentioned it. They got forget about the day after Christmas game. I mean, injuries and COVID, they had so many guys that were just not out there. I mean, it was like a preseason game as far as who the Ravens were fielding team-wise. But go back to that first meeting between the Ravens and the Bengals in Baltimore, mind you. Bengals punched them in the mouth in the second half, and the Ravens didn't have an answer. So, that's where I look at this game, and we've laughed over the years, Bengals going to bungle, and they've never won a Super Bowl, and this and that, but hey, I mean, the Bengals, they were a few minutes away. They were one stop away from being Super Bowl champions last year, and this current group of Ravens, other than John Harbaugh, which we're talking about a decade ago now, other than Justin Tucker, other than Josh Bynes, other than someone like Jason Pierre-Paul, who's won 2 Super Bowls elsewhere, this is by and large, a group of guys that doesn't have anything that compares to the accomplishment that the Bengals had last January. So that's where I say, forget about all that kind of nonsense that the Ravens have. We've always thought of the Ravens having an edge in intangibles against a team like the Bengals, and I'm just not sure that's the case anymore. So that's where I almost look at this, and I have nothing to, I have no direct involvement, but I almost say, if I were the coach, I'd be laying out the challenge, be like, hey, what have you guys done that, that we're going to, put up our nose compared to the Bengals just because of what their history is? They went further in January than you guys have in years and years, and most of you guys have ever gone. So that's where I look at this game, and I kind of lay down the challenge for the Ravens. And to go back to what you said about Vegas, the Bengals are a flawed team from the standpoint of, I think the best thing that could happen for the Ravens would be if Zach Taylor continues to insist on trying to run the ball on first down. They can't run the ball. And that doesn't mean that they should stop trying entirely, but I absolutely think they should start throwing the ball more on first down. And how about getting Jamar Chase more involved in a little more diverse route tree, combinations, and same thing with Tyler Boyd. I mean, T. Higgins is off to a great start, but, at times it feels even though Chase doesn't have bad numbers, I still feel at times, he kind of disappears. Even that Miami game last Thursday night, you're kind of wondering where's Ja'Marr Chase, and you could even see his body language on a couple of occasions. So I'm not shocked as far as the line, and I'm not a gambler anyway. So I'm not going to sit here with any special insight there. But at the same time, you can keep talking about history and prime time and, well, they're the Bengals and these are the Ravens. Well, again, more recent history, and more immediate history says that, not saying that the Bengals have this amazing edge in intangibles, but I don't think we should be viewing it as we traditionally have necessarily. And last Sunday was a perfect example of that. I mean, you talk about home field advantage here in Baltimore and all of that. Well, it hasn't really. It hasn't held up these last two games. So, from that standpoint,
they've lost 5 straight at home, Luke. I mean, again, right. I get it. They were injured. Lamar wasn't there.
Right. Well,
but, like Bill Parcells says, you are what your record says you are. Somebody asked me last week, what are the Ravens? I said, they're 2-2. They're 500. They're, at this point, they're a mediocre team after 4 games. That's what the record says.
Yeah. And I think what you just said, and I even wrote that at BaltimorePositive.com, where, you can chalk up the end of last season to injuries. And look, Lamar Jackson wasn't out there. Begin with that. We understand that. However, there were a lot of players out there that are still on this football team. And, old friend of mine used to say that one of the toughest things to do is to stop losing. And it's, I kind of think for the Ravens right now, I think it's in their head a little bit in that way. And I'm not saying they won't overcome that. I mean, maybe they'll go out there and they'll beat the Bengals by 3 touchdowns on Sunday night. But I do think when you're having some of these late game shortcomings, whether it's a coaching decision that doesn't work, whether you thought it was the right one or the wrong one, whether it's making a mistake, whether it's a critical penalty, whether it's throwing an interception in a spot where you can't throw an interception, whether it's a coverage bust in the secondary, these are all things that are adding up to the Ravens coming up small at times where they need to be coming up big. So I think when that continues to happen, I know John Harbaugh dismissed a question about the team psyche, and I get it. I mean, I'm not sure John's going to sit there and think about that too much because they have too much going on in terms of preparation. But I think you have to wonder a little bit. And, I mean, let's face it. I saw, I was talking to someone and they kind of said the Ravens are looking like the Atlanta Falcons all of a sudden. And wow. Hey, it's hard to argue with that right now. I mean, until they break that trend. And again, I'm not putting too much stock into the end of last year carrying over, but is there some residue there that's still having an impact? I think it's possible. So, like I said, this game for me on Sunday night is very much what's under the hood, because, it's really easy if you want to dismiss and say one play here, one play there. That's the NFL though, Dennis. I mean, we know that this isn't like college football where, you're a top 5 team that's playing, an FCS school or some mid-major that no one's heard of, that just came up to the FBS level, and you're just going to go out, roll the ball out, and you're going to destroy them. It's not like that. The margin between the best team and the worst team isn't nearly as large in the NFL as it is at any other level of football. So from that standpoint, you can talk about close games, and I get it. I mean, they're on this stretch now where they've lost so many games in a row, 1-score games, and that will flip at some point in time, just from a regression standpoint, law of averages standpoint. But you got to go out and make plays to win football games, and the Ravens have not done a very good job of doing that in these 2 losses on either side of the ball, quite frankly. So, the challenge is there, and it's a team that embarrassed them last year, and I think it's a team that, while I still look at them and say, one of the best things that could happen for the Ravens would be if the Bengals continue to try to run the ball on first down, because I just, I think their interior line, offensive line doesn't match up well with the Ravens' interior defensive line. But that said, the weapons on the outside that they have, the passing game, Joe Burrow is playing better over the last couple of weeks. The Bengals are playing better over the last couple of weeks. And, oh yeah, we spent so much time talking about their offense. Take a look at what their defense is doing. And you're talking about a Ravens team that, as well as they've played offensively at times, we've also seen them have examples like Sunday against Buffalo, where played really well offensively for 27 minutes, and then rest of the way, not so much. So I think we tend to focus on the quarterbacks, and understandably so, but I think a big question is going to be, how do the Ravens handle a Bengals defense that's playing well. And they profile in some ways, not exactly, but in some ways, similar to how that Buffalo defense plays.
Yeah.
And we saw what Buffalo did once again to Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, which was, especially in the second half, really bottle them up.
Yeah, it just I'm glad you touched on both of those defenses. It seemed like both of those coordinators, they give the Ravens offense a hard time. And well, the Bills to me have better personnel. They have more explosive personnel when everybody's healthy. Where the Bengals, they got a bunch of guys. I mean, it's but they all fit together, right? Not many All Pros and Pro Bowl players back there, but they do give the Ravens a hard time. With that said, the analytics. Let's go back to that momentarily. 67% chance of winning with a field goal, 75% chance with a touchdown. I didn't know that there was enough of a difference, Luke, to me, to go for the touchdown in that situation. I mean, I get it, but they're at home. You got the home crowd going bananas. You got rain. You got wind. You're looking for a bad snap. You're looking for something, and you're looking for the lead, right? So to me, that to me made more sense in retrospect than going for a touchdown in that situation. And maybe that's why. And Marcus Peters, God bless him. Look, I don't agree him going after the coach in the manner that he did. And thankfully, he wasn't on the field last year. Maybe that was a blessing in disguise. But at least he cares. At least he's emotional. But to not give the defense a lead and a chance to defend that lead. Again, you talk about psyche and stuff like that, and momentum. It's just a lot to unpack there. It really is.
Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, even though I can't say I ultimately agree, I certainly understand. And I will say, and I even acknowledge this in what I wrote after the game, that I do wonder at this point what it means for the psyche. But at the same time, the game was tied. It doesn't mean the game's over. And Buffalo marched right down the field on them. And I guess for me, where I struggle, Dennis, is a 3-point lead magical spinach, Popeye-like spinach that's going to suddenly make the defense play better than it did? I don't know. That's where I just struggle with it, and I just feel.
But go back to the 2012 Ravens. The 2012 Ravens weren't good between the 20s, right? But they were great in red zone.
But they had Ed Reed and Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs, and
exactly. And Ray Lewis used to say they're not in until they're in, right? So to me, whether it's a field goal, whether it's a touchdown, and John said, well, had we scored a field goal, they would have been playing 4-down offense. Well, to a point, to a point of, if they've got a 4th and 3 on our 27-yard line, do they trot out the field goal kicker? Bad snap, high snap, whatever. A lot of things can go wrong, and I guess that's my heartburn with them not doing what they did. But look, and the other piece I got to touch on this, Lamar Jackson in his 5th year, I've seen enough. He's not a good inclement weather player. He's not.
Yeah.
The wetness, the elements do seem to trouble him. And so to me, inclement weather, and I don't know if it's cold weather, but definitely when it's raining in the forecast, he just doesn't play up to par. He just doesn't.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I made the point earlier, and I'll go back to it. And again, we'll agree to disagree, and I don't think we're in like major disagreement here. I don't feel like I'm not saying you're wrong. We just have a different opinion about it. But one point I'll just make, but it does coincide with what you just mentioned, is I'll still, at the end of the day, if I need to make a play to win a football game, I'd rather put it in Lamar Jackson's hands than a defense that hasn't shown that it's up to the task. Even going back a couple years now. I mean, let's face it. I mean, even some of the criticisms of 2020, they had some situations late in games where they didn't play at a extremely high level. I think back to even though they won the game, that Browns game, that Monday night game, the defense wasn't making any stops. I mean, I think back to the Eagles nearly coming back. So it's something that's kind of been a thing for them for a couple years, where you can't even just say it was only the injuries last year. It was happening even before that. But I just, I look at it and I again say, do I want to try to win the game with Lamar Jackson or my defense? And, they chose Lamar Jackson there, and it didn't work out. And maybe to your point, because of the weather, maybe they shouldn't have done that. So, again, you move on. And I will say, I'll say this much. Even if you disagreed with John Harbaugh's decision there, a lot of blame to go around. A lot. Coaches, yes. Players, yes. Execution, yes. Certain decisions, yes. Clock management. I mean, I mentioned the field goal. How about challenging the spot of the ball? And look, I think Lamar probably did pick it up there. But Dennis, you watch the NFL every week. Yep. The percentage of successful spot of the ball challenges in the NFL is extraordinarily small. And you showed a willingness that you were going to go for it there anyway, where I just look at this and just say, was the juice worth the squeeze there, knowing that that is a low percentage play? And oh yeah, on that final drive, even if the Ravens still make the same decision and it still turns out that same way, you'd like to have another timeout in your pocket, which could have changed the math there in terms of trying to preserve some time. Again, all of these things add up to a loss. And I'm not absolving John Harbaugh whatsoever, even if I, tepidly agree with going forward on fourth down, let's say. So, again, it all adds up, and that's why they need to be better across the board. I mean, they really do.
And that was magnified at the time management, the clock management by the Bills' final drive in the first half. I had Bills fans in my section. McDermott is sitting with 3 timeouts and the clock is winding down, and call a timeout. He saved his timeouts because you know what? When you have 25 seconds left and you're on the 20-yard line, that's an eternity, right? And so, but he showed great discipline in not burning his timeouts. And again, I just think he's gotten the best of John Harbaugh in coaching, and the numbers say that, right? And also the other piece is Josh Allen. I mean, he made mistakes too, but he's a dude. You talk about a guy, Wyoming guy, used to playing in bad weather. The throw he made to Dawson Knox in the fourth quarter when he dropped it over 2 Ravens defenders was one of the, in that situation was a fantastic throw. And let's give them credit. I mean, the other team was always like to say they're trying to win as well, right? But he's a dude, man. I tell you what, my respect level for him as a player went up tremendously the way he performed in that fourth quarter against the Ravens.
I want to mention, I'll talk about Josh Allen, but I also want to mention Leslie Frazier and that defense.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, he has put together some nice game plans against the Ravens where he's gotten the best of Greg Roman and Lamar Jackson. I mean, it just has. Even go back to 2019, which the Ravens won that game. Remember, there was a long pass to Hayden Hurst in the second half that kind of proved to be the difference. And that was when this Ravens offense was rolling unlike anything we've ever seen here in Baltimore, quite frankly. And they held them in check. I mean, go look at the numbers. They didn't run for a ton of yardage. Lamar had a solid day, but it wasn't anything special. And certainly we all remember what happened in the playoff game. But you mentioned Josh Allen. You mentioned some of the the arm talent has always been there.
Unbelievable.
The question was always going to be, the strength of the throwing arm was always, no one ever doubted that. The question was going to be the accuracy, and we've seen what he's done. Then give Brian Daboll, their former offensive coordinator, who's of course now the coach of the Giants. He deserves credit as far as his development. But the thing for me that's amazing is we see Lamar run on a weekly basis, and he has no peer. But if there's someone that is still pretty darn special running the football in the NFL, it's Josh Allen. I mean, my goodness. And I'm not going to absolve Patrick Queen for taking a bad angle on the touchdown run, because he did take a bad angle, but that's still a pretty good move that Josh Allen put on him. So he does it in a different way. And I think some of the criticism and concern expressed about Lamar for taking hits, Josh Allen definitely takes hits. He's bigger.
Oh, he gives hits. He gives hits too.
But I would say, if we're gonna be consistent, there's probably, and I'm guessing Buffalo local sports talk radio and fans, I'm sure there's that kind of talk, because you're always afraid of your best player getting hurt, right? So, but he does some special things with his legs himself. He's not Lamar. Again, I don't want to put him in that category, because Lamar, maybe Randall Cunningham and Michael Vick are the only ones you could really put in that category, at different periods of time in the game. But, Josh Allen, you're right. He's a special talent.
He's a dude. I mean, I'm telling you, he is a dude. But back to the defensive coordinator, Leslie Frazier, as we talk about the Bengals game, Lou Anarumo, I mean, he's had some good game plans against the Ravens offense. So that's really the X factor Sunday nights, the Bengals defense against the Ravens offense. As you said, they've been under the radar for a long time now.
Yeah, they have. And one thing I'll mention, as much as you look at the Bengals injury report this week and say, well, they're a relatively healthy football team. I mean, they only had one player on their 53-man roster who didn't practice on Wednesday for an injury reason. It was their backup tight end. But one name that's missing, and this could prove pretty large because this guy's a heck of a player, and no pun intended, because he's a large player, but no DJ Reader at nose tackle. One of the most underrated players in the NFL. As much as people will talk about Jesse Bates or Trey Hendrickson, Reeder might be the best player on that defense. I mean, he's just an absolute beast that clogs up the middle and can do things as push in the pocket and things of that nature. So he's just a very well-rounded interior defensive lineman. So he's out. So he's not going to be there. And if you're looking at, I don't want to say it'll be a complete weakness for the Bengals, but not as strong as it normally is. That's where you're hoping this Ravens running game, which, at this point, I don't expect Gus Edwards to play Sunday. I mean, I think that would be unrealistic considering how they've ramped up everyone. He's just getting back to the field. Dobbins should be fine, although he missed practice on Wednesday. So keep an eye on that. But no Justice Hill, who's been
and he
their
was
most
playing.
explosive
He was
runner.
playing real well. And again, in the game of what ifs, right? Then there were at least a dozen what ifs for the Ravens. What if he doesn't come up lame and pull that hammy? I mean, he was finding room to the outside. He was looking more explosive and has the most juice of any Ravens running back on the current roster.
Yeah, right now. I mean, maybe J.K. Dobbins, who I still, I thought he looked pretty good. He's making positive contributions, but is he back to pre-injury form yet? No. And I think it would be unrealistic to expect that. I mean, we've talked about, how serious that knee injury was. But, that's something where I want to see what the interior offensive line does against that Bengals interior. I mean, again, they're good on the edges with Hubbard and Hendrickson. They're good at linebacker. And it'll be interesting to see, how effectively they can defend Mark Andrews. Because let's face it, Rashad Bateman's a question mark at this point. Mid-foot, left the stadium in a walking boot. John Harbaugh said he's, quote, hopeful on Wednesday.
But they signed Andy Isabella, one of my mock draft crushes from back in the day, and I'm pretty sure he's going to be in a 53-man roster Sunday night.
So we'll see. I'm
saying that, of course, tongue in cheek, but
sure,
yeah, it's
sure. Well, I'm not opposed to bringing them in, but yeah, but it also it does illustrate where they are right now, and this is why we said. Even if you're a big believer in Rashad Bateman, did they do enough at wide receiver? And look, I like Duvernay. Duvernay's having a nice season, but if Bateman's out and you're talking about Duvernay and what else?
It's funny because
that doesn't sound good going up against the Bengals, right? With their high octane potential with their passing game.
Yeah, a week ago, somebody said, they're comparing Bateman's and Hollywood Brown stats. And like, look, Bateman's doing slightly better. And like, it'd be nice to have them both on the team. I mean, look, I'm not being disrespectful to Griff Whalen and Michael Campanero, but when we went up to Minnesota and Joe Flacco had those guys to throw to, and the team was hanging in there thanks to the defensive performance. But my gosh, you just can't deplete your wide receiver room by that much and expect to win.
Dennis, I wrote this in my 12 Ravens thoughts after the game, but and fully acknowledging that Bateman was already dealing with this foot issue at the time. But I can't help but go back to midway through the third quarter, the third down slant, where is the ball out in front of him a touch more than you'd like? Yeah. But does a true legitimate number one wide receiver make that catch? Yeah. The Ravens punted. Very next play from scrimmage, Allen throws the sideline ball to Stefon Diggs, who extends his arms and makes a terrific catch. And look, I'm not expecting Rashad Bateman to be Stefon Diggs. Let's be very clear about that. But for me, it was a microcosm of what other teams do at that position compared to the Ravens. Let's face it, their philosophy at wide receiver for a very long time now has been, what do we need to do to just get by at the position? And what you just said is perfect. All along, if you want to trade Marquise, I would not have paid Marquise Brown a long-term deal. Let's be very clear about that. But I like the idea of having him and Rashad Bateman. And when you were going to trade Marquise Brown, fine. They got really good value. Don't get me wrong. They got great value for what he had left as far as contractually speaking. But just value in a vacuum doesn't win you football games on Sundays. And I still look at what they did or didn't do at wide receiver. And I said, what happens if something happens to Bateman? And now here we are. And we're talking about the Ravens potentially going into a game with, as you mentioned, maybe Andy Isabella's called up from the practice squad. And look, again, I like Duvernay, but I feel like I'd like Duvernay much more as a number 3, and now he might be a number 1. And, I don't know. I mean, Demarcus Robinson and James Prochet. And
what is Prochet? Is Prochet available at least or not?
He's healthy again. John Harbaugh was asked about him this week. He acknowledged. I don't know, Dennis. I just feel at this point, and I'm not saying that the Ravens are even right here, it doesn't feel like they have a lot of belief in him. And he's not the biggest guy. and I know he's done well in training camp the last couple of years. I'll point out everyone was going nuts about Isaiah Likely during the preseason, and it's just the latest example. And look, Isaiah Likely still may be a really good player. I do not at all want to suggest that he's a bust or anything like that. So anyone who's thinking that right now listening, I'm not saying that. However, it is a reminder of training camp and preseason is not the regular season. And to his credit, Proche in some limited opportunities has done some things. So maybe he get the call this week. Maybe he gets some opportunities. I'm not opposed to him getting opportunities. Someone's going to have to catch the ball this weekend, right? If Bateman is not playing Sunday night. But it's another example that, you look at it, you look at who's gotten snaps and who hasn't. And he was banged up and he missed some time, had a groin issue. Sounds like he's healthy. He's off the injury report now. So maybe we do see more of him, but it just, all of it adding up, it doesn't feel like there's a ton of belief in what he can do. And maybe he'll prove them wrong. And look, I'll be the first guy to say, I don't exactly trust the Ravens evaluation process at the wide receiver position. There's not exactly a great track record there. So they could be completely wrong. And maybe James Proche, a week from now, we're talking about him catching a touchdown and being their leading receiver. Who the heck knows? But it just doesn't feel at this point that there's a ton of belief in what he can do for this offense, or he'd be out there because, Demarcus Robinson, he's fine, but he's with Kansas City, but they clearly didn't have any urgency to keep him, and that's on the heels of trading Tyreek Hill. So, we'll see how it plays out. But unfortunately, we're talking about that position. We're talking about edge. Justin Houston, does he get back to the field this week? Jason Pierre-Paul, by the way, kind of floored that he played 55 snaps.
He did.
Didn't make splash plays, but I'll say this: hustled, looked to be in decent shape. I'll be interested to see what that looks like, and hopefully that can help out. Who I will say, the late game controversy aside, which I think there was some vindication for him because Odafe Oweh actually came really, really stinking close to punching that ball out.
He really did. He did.
He's coming off of his best game of the season, and he still missed a couple plays. And we mentioned Josh Allen's escapability. It's Lamar-like in some ways. But maybe Pierre-Paul being out there helped, take some of the attention away from Oweh and maybe gets him going, because they need more from him. They need more from some of these. We've talked about it. Some of these recent first-round picks. Patrick Queen, we've talked about it at length. Bateman, he's hurt right now, but still want to see more consistency. He dropped a couple passes on Sunday. Need to see more from Oweh. It's Linderbaum, 3 penalties. It's early. You're talking about the first month of his NFL career. Same with Kyle Hamilton. But this wave of first-round picks, these are the guys that need to be the next young, affordable stud-like players for the Ravens, knowing that we presume they're going to pay Lamar Jackson at some point, and it's going to make their cap situation more challenging. So you need those young players. They need to become your next studs, because you're not going to have as much money for those vet signings and to keep some of those other guys. So that's where you look at this over the, not just Sunday night, but just moving forward the rest of the season. You want to see progress from that group. So I'm not saying you won't. I'm just saying that that's where the Ravens kind of find themselves right now. So we'll see. It should be, I expect a close game on Sunday night, but it's tough. I feel strange saying this, Dennis, and I'll have my official 5 predictions, my game score prediction at BaltimorePositive.com over the weekend that you can check out. But, for the first time in a while, dare I say ever, I don't know. Can I trust the Ravens? Do they, what about them warrants more trust than, where the Bengals were at the end of last year? So, we'll see how it plays out. And again, they have an opportunity to put to bed much of the talk about those blown leads and late losses. But boy, if you don't win on Sunday night, then you're 2-3. Season's still in front of you, but there's even more doubt starts to grow as far as, what is this team exactly? Are they a playoff contender, but nothing more than that? Or are they what they fancy themselves being, which is a Super Bowl contender? Well, you need to go out and take care of business on your home field. How about that? You don't choke away fourth quarter leads. If you consider yourself a legitimate contender, you got to beat some of these other teams that are, great or really good or wherever they ultimately rank. So, the Bengals, again, they got off to an 0-2 start, but it seems like they've righted themselves in some ways at the very least. They're still figuring out their running game, but another factor, I mentioned their health. They're also coming off of extra rest, and that's something to keep in mind as well, even though they are playing on the road. So it should be a good one. And first of 6 AFC North games for the Ravens. We know how important those games are. We know how there is very little given in those games. So Ravens need to go out there and play well. And most importantly, because we've seen them play well, they played well in stretches in all 4 of these games. How about finishing a football game? That needs to be the objective on Sunday night.
Yeah, this game has significant division implications. Pittsburgh seems to be having a down year, although I'm never in a position to count them out under any circumstance with Mike Tomlin as the head coach. Browns seems to still be the Browns, so it looks like at this stage to be a 2-team race. So it just adds to the significance and magnitude of this game.
No question about it. I mean, you win this game, then that, whether it's going to be Saturday night, January 7th, or Sunday, January 8th, you play Cincinnati on the road, week 18. Boy, it'd be nice to have that first one in hand against your biggest division rival at this point. I still Pittsburgh in the big picture, but right now, as it stands in 2022, the Bengals are their biggest rival, and the Bengals embarrassed them twice last year. So there should be plenty of motivation there, but at the same time, you mentioned Marcus Peters a few minutes ago, and I'm with you. You never want to see a guy be in a position where he has to be restrained from his head coach, and that's not a great look. But I will say this much. I'd like to see a few more guys ticked off like Marcus Peters was. And that doesn't mean they're ticked off at John Harbaugh or a specific decision. How about just being ticked off about the fact that you're 2-2 when you could be 4-0 right now? That's, a little more urgency there, not being, I don't want to say overly satisfied with where you are as a football team, but to feel a little more urgency to say, hey guys, like this is below the bar, especially on our home field. Go back and look at what our record's been for 2 decades in this building, and we've blown 2 17-plus point leads and lost when that had only happened 3 times in 26 years for the franchise. I mean, it's below the bar.
No, I agree with you, especially when I see a great guy like Calais Campbell on the roster. He doesn't have much football left. You'd like to see him go on top, and love to see the Ravens win the Super Bowl just for him alone. And he's on the field giving it his all, arguing with their officials. Yeah, they got to do better. They got to expect better. And I'm with you. I like to see more players get pissed off for greatness, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, to answer the question, I don't think there's going to be any lingering fallout between Marcus Peters and John Harbaugh. And I'll say this much: if there is, then that's a sign that this culture that the Ravens preach about having, being so special and so much camaraderie and a tight-knit locker room and all those different things, then that's a lot of lip service. Players and coaches get ticked off at each other. These Marlon Humphrey said it on Wednesday. There's fighting that goes on behind closed doors all the time. It's a highly competitive environment. Dennis, there are millions of dollars at stake here between players' contracts, coaches, team revenue, all these different things. We know that. So you're going to tell me that these individuals who are as competitive as anyone you'll find in a society to get to the level that they do, whether you're talking about coaching or playing, that they're not going to have some disagreements and it might not get heated at times? It happens. Again, you don't want it to happen with the whole world watching, as we saw on Sunday. And certainly you don't want a repeat of that. I mean, if Marcus Peters is having another incident like that on Sunday Night Football, then it might be a different conversation. But my gut tells me, that won't be an issue moving forward. And if it is, again, maybe that team culture that the Ravens fancy themselves talking about all the time isn't quite as strong as we've been led to believe.
Team culture is great when you're winning, not so much when you're losing, right? Things get magnified in either direction. And I always, I don't dislike situations like these as a competitor. I think when you face adversity, that's when you figure out what you have around you. And sometimes it's not enough. Yeah. And it's always an opportunity to improve yourself.
No question about it. And look, there's a lot of concern, and I think there's a balance here. I think there are reasons to be concerned, but at the same time, they're 2-2. As you mentioned, it's not a particularly strong division. I mean, we're talking about the Bengals and what the Bengals started 0-2. I mean, they've looked better the last couple of weeks, but they're still trying to find their way in different ways than the Ravens. But they're fine. They're fine right now. However, internally, you don't want those guys to be thinking that. You want them to feel a little more urgency. You want them to feel like this is a must-win game on Sunday night. Is it actually a must-win game? Not really. But as I said, if you lose another one, you drop another home game and you lose another one to the Bengals, boy, you're looking at this team and you're saying, all right, well, you're better than the Jets and you're better than the Patriots. Well, big whoop. Lots of teams are better than those teams. So that's where you look at this thing and say, reestablish your identity a little bit on Sunday night and go out there and take care of business against a team that, handed you your what a couple times last year and win a game in the division and get yourself back to over 500 in first place in the division. And then you're fine moving forward. And then we're talking about the Giants and we're talking about the Browns, 2 very winnable games the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, but you know what? I was just looking at the schedule as you were. They're at MetLife Stadium. They haven't had a ton of success up there. Mixed results for the years. Giants, new head coach, right? Saquon Barkley healthy. Believing you got the Wink Martindale factor there. So in every game there's a storyline for the teams, and with the parity Latin League, I mean, any given Sunday, right? It's anyone can beat anybody else.
No question. But I just think for this team, beating the Bengals, defending AFC champion. Certainly a team that gave them all kinds of problems last year, division rival. I think it would be a nice feather in their cap to just say, okay, we're fine. Dolphins game, Bills game, that stunk. The endings for each of those games stunk. But we took care of business against a division rival, 3-2. We're in first place in the division. We're fine. Let's move forward now and just try to continue to get better. And I think it's as simple as that. But if they don't do that, then this continues to build. This continues to boil over in terms of, why can't the Ravens win at home? Why can't they beat a good to great team? So again, this is an under the hood game for me, and I admit I have some concerns about it, Dennis. I really do, because I think this is a good football team they're playing, and I don't like the fact that Rashad Bateman is banged up and don't know if he's going to play, and same with Justice Hill and Justin Houston. I mean, it's there are things to be concerned about if you're John Harbaugh and the Ravens right now. That's for sure.
Great stuff as always, Luke. I appreciate your time as well as the great conversation. Please tell our listeners where they can find your WNST Baltimore Positive, your blog, and everything else that you do.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke, as I'll be live from the stadium Sunday Night Football. Ravens wearing the all black uniforms. Hope you get a little bit of an edge there. We know the record in prime time. And a chance to exact a little bit of revenge against the Bengals, who beat them twice last year in convincing fashion. Check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. My latest 12 Ravens thoughts. We'll have the final injury report, my predictions for Sunday, some thoughts on the Orioles. Very fun, enjoyable, unexpected 2022 season coming to an end. All of that at BaltimorePositive.com. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. If you are, you'll get the final injury report. You'll get game day inactives, any significant injury updates, any significant roster moves, all of that sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive text service sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. The Mike Elias, Brandon Hyde season-ending press conference from Camden Yards, and Ravens players and coaches interviews from Owings Mills, as well as post-game reaction. All of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
Luke, it's always a pleasure having you on. You and I seem to always go over a segment at a time, but it's all great stuff. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Hey, plenty to talk about when you're talking about these kinds of losses that are pretty unique, pretty rare in the history of the franchise. So okay to go a little overtime when we're talking about that. But yeah, big one for the Ravens on Sunday night. They need to get themselves back on track in a big way.
All right, look, looking forward to all your tweets from the stadium, fashion tweets, Bengals, white jerseys, black pants, orange helmets, Ravens all black. Nelly at halftime. It should be quite the show.
Sounds good, Dennis. I look forward to it.
Stay well, my friend. There he goes, Luke Jones here, 1570 AM, Baltimore Positive, WNST. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.